internet to psychoanalytic talk. And today we are talking about the concept of misery, conceptualized by Elionor Greenberg in her very good book, Borderline Narcissistic and Schizoid Adaptations. So fundamentally, this concept of misery is an anagram for the 6 more prevalent traits of borderline personality disorder, at least how she conceptualizes it. And those 6 elements, and I'm going to start with the M, is mother issue, i.e. the borderline individual has often had a discontinuous and unstable relationship with a primary caregiver. That unstableness has seeped into the relationship, has become the building blocks of the personality itself, meaning that the relationship has always been discontinuous. Often the mother figure also might have switched moods or have mood swings that were ununderstandable for the child. The child was too young to truly understand what was happening with mother. So therefore, instead of being able to understand the instability, there is this idea that instability is the way it should be. But it's going to have major repercussions for the infant, which is going to internalize that mother is unstable. Thus, there's never a sense of security. Therefore, there is always mother issues. Of course, here, and Greenberg also talks about this, it's not necessarily the mother, right? It can be the father, it can be someone that takes care of the child. The idea is that the very first people to really take care of the infant are going to be unreliable, be it because of mood swings, because of personality disorders, because of a whole plethora of phenomena. But the idea is that it can't be there for the child, thus creating issues with the parent. And it's also worth noting that Elionor Greenberg states that fundamentally this continuousness prevents a child from separating. So the child is not fully separate from the primary caregiver. And when they do have partners, those partners are often very close in temperament, nature, or behavior from the primary caregiver. So in a way, unconsciously, never quite fully themselves. They're always non-separated, intertwined with the parents. Moving on, because this is the moving point, to the I. I stands for identity issues. So the identity issues stem from this complicated relationship with the caregiver, which is the individual is prevented from separating and becoming themselves. And in that preventiveness, what happens is that the person then has an idea of themselves which is truncated because it's not as full as it should be. Therefore, the instability that was in the relationship becomes part of the identity of the person. The person might see themselves as completely worthless, unable to cope, unwilling to help. They might see themselves as particularly bad. They don't believe necessarily in their own goodness, in their own capacity to help and to love. They might feel that they themselves are the worst person, and they might also at other points in time believe themselves to be the best, to be deserving of everything, to be that much better than others. And we can see that there is an instability, not just in the relationships, but also in the identity itself, that the ego of the individual with borderline personality disorder is discontinuous. It's not stable. And there's no way for the person to be able to fully grasp secure image of themselves because of what happened with a primary caregiver. That's a continuation into the identity and in the processes of identification, which were incomplete because the parent wasn't able to give space to separate. Therefore, the image oscillates between all good and all bad. An oscillation that we'll see a bit of French here as well, find in the S. The S stands for splitting, because what happens with that identity is that there's a division between good and bad, or I'm all good, or I'm all bad. But this also seeps into the relationships, because what you have to understand is that instability that mother has, or father has, or the primary caregiver has, should I be more precise, is fundamentally an instability because the infant cannot conceptualize the nuances of a complicated human dynamic and relationship. Therefore, the child is going to split everything in between good, bad. This is very notable for children. But what's going to happen is that for the person with borderline, is that they're not going to be able, because of this instability, to build a more nuanced perspective. So relationships are going to fall into the same split. And that splitting, therefore, affects the personality, but it affects the relationships. Therefore, it's not uncommon for people with borderline personality disorder to think that someone is completely good, perfect, incredible, the love of their lives, the best friend of the best, the most wonderful parent, the most incredible individual. And if there's a betrayal, disappointment, or downright frustration, they might switch completely that vision that they have of someone from all good to all bad, i.e. they're the worst individual, they're a complete narcissist, they are sociopathic, and so on and so forth. So you can see that instability seeps into the outside world as well. So the splitting is internal, i.e. there's split elements in which the person feels all powerful, then all hopeless. And there is an external split, i.e. the outside world, in which the individual is going to be, there are people that are all good, wonderful, perfect, and there are people that are the absolute salt of the earth, and there is no in-between, there's no nuance, because the space for nuance, which comes with separation, individuation, and realizing that there is a form of renouncement, wasn't really occurring during childhood. Therefore, they have, in a way, plateaued at a more split version of personality and of the world. So moving on, we have phases of abandonment and engulfment, which is the E. So these phases are to do with what the person feels in a relationship. Too close to the borderline, i.e. if the person is always there, even supportively, right? It's not just negative, but even in the support that they can give of the borderline person, sometimes it might be too much. That too much is not necessarily experiences, no, it's okay, you can leave me alone. There's no capacity to be alone. But however, if it's too much, the borderline won't necessarily be able to verbalize it. What's going to happen is that there's going to be behavior like, for example, aggression, passive-aggressive behavior, or sometimes even provocations. So what is happening at that moment is the borderline person is afraid of being engulfed, i.e. being completely submerged by the other. In a way, they're afraid of being intruded, and that their personality might just melt, a bit like snow, right? So what's going to happen is that to avoid melting into the other, or that's their fear of engulfment, they're going to fight against that. They're going to push back. And unfortunately, they're not going to necessarily push back in the more, how can I say, subtle forms. The pushback can be quite violent, they can push people outside, they can reject them completely. And in that moment, the borderline person feels that if their person were to stay, that their core sense of self will be completely annihilated and replaced by a version of themselves that's adapted to the other. Therefore, we can see here that the identity issues have a direct impact on the fear of engulfment, that they're afraid of being engulfed. But if the person leaves, then they're afraid of being abandoned. So you can see that here, it's a very subtle and complicated act, being with a borderline individual. As too close, and you might trigger their fear of engulfment, and too far, you might trigger their fear of being abandoned. And for that abandonment is often something they fear because it's something that they've experienced in early childhood. About 80% of borderline people have experienced early in their lives abandonment. or have had a traumatic experience, leaving a country they were not prepared, or losing a relative, and something that has sparked the abandonment issue. So here we can see that without the others, they are insecure, sad within their identity. But with the other, if it's too long, they feel intruded and in jeopardy. So it's a very, very, how can I say, travail de dentelle, as we would say in French, i.e., it's a very complicated work to be done and needs a lot of precision to really work out for the borderline. So here there is this sense of instability here also with those fears, because you can go from one to the other really, really quickly. If they feel rejected, that will trigger the fear of abandonment. And if they feel that you're getting too close, then that creates the fear of engulfment, of disappearing within the identity of the other, or becoming exactly what the other wants. So very subtle and very complicated. Then we have the R. The R stands for rage. As if they feel abandoned or threatened, the borderline person can react emotionally very deeply, and that depth is sometimes rage. That rage can be quite powerful, can be terrifying even, if you don't know how to handle it. And that rage is there because at the moment where they feel abandoned or engulfed, there's a real threat in their internal sense of self, of disappearing, of vanishing. So in a way they're fighting with everything that they've got to survive, to make their identity push through, to make their identity live another day, so to speak. Because of that, it's a full-on rage. And also because for them, what happens in that moment is that as we were saying, we were talking about splitting before, what is happening right when their rage is at the maximum is that they can only see the others as all bad. There is no nuance to be had, there is no discussion, there is only rage, that pure feeling, because the other is out to get them. Not because the other necessarily is wanting to get them, even though sometimes it can happen, but the other is perceived as being all bad. So therefore the only reaction to evil is rage. And as Harry Guntrip, I'm leaving a bit Elionor Greenberg for a couple of seconds, as Guntrip once said, you only really deeply hate something if you find it unfair. And in those moments of rage, it's as if the other one is unjust, but beyond that, it's not just that he's unjust, it's that he could never be just, and he will never be just, and he just enjoys hurting you. Therefore, there is no nuance to be had, there is only rage. And then we have the last and final letter, the Y. So the Y stands for yearning, because deep down, under all those fears, those issues, and those anxieties, lies a profound will, a profound need for the borderline of finding connection, of finding finally a relationship that will work out, a relationship in which they'll feel healed, and in which they can connect and they can let go of all those previous letters we talked about, that they can finally find a good enough relationship, a stable enough relationship, in order to be able to build their own stability, their own sense of identity, and their own being. And that's at the core what they hope for. It's a hope that's so bright that often it can put them in dangerous situations if they find someone that they think can make them whole again, which in and of itself is an illusion, but something that they yearn for so much. And I think Elionor Greenberg was so right to put it in, as it's something of a major force, and it can be a major threat for the individual, as sometimes that illusion is so strong that they're going to hurt themselves in order to maintain the relationship. If you've ever heard about Fernburn's exciting object, it's exactly that. It's something that's so powerful because it's the hope of getting everything you need from the relationship made manifest. And that hope, unconscious, is so strong that can push the individual to do things that are self-sacrificing or self-defeating in order to get it. So fundamentally, this concept of misery, which is the 6 main core elements of borderline subjectivity, at least when they're in a state of crisis, is very good. I feel that Elionor Greenberg has nailed it, that these elements are indeed what is prevalent during moments where the individual can no longer cope. And often when you work with these people, what you find is that in the moments of crises, they will come to the practice with those elements, and they're not necessarily, you can't necessarily work directly on them because of the intensity of them, but, and this is very important, you keep it in mind, and when they have reached a point of stability, thanks to the therapist and the boundaries of the therapy, they can reach a point of stability, you can then go back and work on those elements, be it the mother issues, the identification issue, the splitting, the abandonment, the engulfment, the rage, and the yearning. All of them have to be, or should be, should I say, analyzed and worked on, as those are the main focal points of borderline personality disorder. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. If you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do so in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.